Hey, everyone. Ludwig here. What would you do if a Hollywood legend walked right past you, and you didn't even notice? Picture this. Clint Eastwood, yes, the Clint Eastwood, strolled into one of LA's most upscale restaurants wearing nothing more than a simple polo shirt and casual slacks. Can you imagine? Not a single person recognized him. But then, something outrageous happened. An overly confident waitress, blinded by her own arrogance, made what would soon be the biggest mistake of her career. She tried to kick out and publicly humiliate the man she assumed was just another random, older customer. What she didn't realize, Clint Eastwood didn't just have a reservation at this luxurious establishment. He owned the entire place. What unfolded next became an unforgettable Hollywood tale, a moment that captured the essence of respect in true Clint Eastwood style. It all began on a typical Friday evening at the Grand Oak. The dining room was alive with a hum of LA's elite. Young tech moguls dressed to the nines in designer suits, social media influencers snapping shots of their golden-plated desserts, and old money families keeping up their long-standing dinner traditions. Amid this crowd of glitz and glamour, there sat a man, unassuming and quiet, in a simple gray polo shirt and slacks. With a glass of whiskey in hand, he occupied his usual corner table, observing the scene with an air of calm detachment. Now, most of the seasoned staff knew exactly who he was. After all, how could they not? But there was a twist. When Clint Eastwood quietly purchased the Grand Oak 6 months earlier, he gave the team very clear instructions: treat me like any other guest during my visits. His philosophy was simple. The mark of a great restaurant isn't in how they treat celebrities, but in how they treat the average diner. Enter Rachel, the restaurant's newest waitress. Fresh out of an elite hospitality school and eager to make her mark, she was more interested in impressing the influencers than serving the regular patrons. Her phone, loaded with countless food photos for her growing social media following, peeked out of her apron pocket. To her, the casually dressed man sipping whiskey didn't fit the image of the Grand Oak's high-profile clientele. Rachel had no idea who Clint Eastwood was. She had spent most of her shift doting on guests she deemed important while casting disapproving glances at the underdressed man in her section. From across the room, Thomas, the longtime manager, watched the scene unfold. He felt a pang of unease. He recognized that look on Rachel's face. It was the same one she had given a retired surgeon last week, simply because he wore loafers instead of polished dress shoes. But this time, Thomas knew things were about to escalate. Rachel approached Clint's table, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. The veteran staff members froze, their eyes darting nervously between the two. They had seen Clint's calm demeanor before, and they knew what often followed. "Sir," Rachel began, her tone dripping with polite condescension, "I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for quite some time now." Clint looked up, meeting her gaze with the calm intensity that had silenced some of Hollywood's most powerful figures. "It's a good whiskey," he replied evenly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Undeterred, Rachel pressed on, her fake concern now turning into a subtle reprimand. "Perhaps," she suggested, gesturing toward the bar, "you'd feel more comfortable over there? We're expecting several reserved parties, and, well, this table," she motioned to the pristine white tablecloth, "is usually reserved for our dining guests." Nearby, a young busboy named Miguel paused mid-task. He had immigrated from Mexico 2 years earlier and worked tirelessly to support his family. Miguel knew who Clint Eastwood was. He had watched all of Clint's films with his father back home. His hands tightened around the tray he was holding as he fought the urge to intervene. Clint took another unhurried sip of his whiskey, his composure unshaken. "I'm comfortable here," he said simply. Rachel's practiced smile faltered for a brief moment. Glancing at her watch, she turned her attention to a group of sharply dressed tech executives waiting near the host stand. "Sir," she continued, her voice now laced with thinly veiled disdain, "our executive chef crafts an exclusive menu, and, as you might expect, the prices reflect the caliber of our establishment." At the next table, an older couple who had been regular patrons for over 20 years shifted uncomfortably. The husband started to speak up, but his wife placed a gentle hand on his arm. She recognized the look in Clint's eyes, a look that preceded some of the most unforgettable moments in cinema history. With unwavering calm, Clint responded, his voice steady and firm, "I'm well aware of the prices." Familiar with the steady, gravelly tone that had commanded audiences in countless films, Clint responded with a quiet calm, his words a subtle yet piercing challenge. Rachel's forced smile evaporated as she pulled out her order pad in a huff, her movements sharp and irritated. "Well then, sir," she began, her voice carrying a thin veneer of professionalism barely masking her frustration. "Shall I explain our menu slowly, perhaps?" Her tone sharpened, delivering a pointed jab at Clint's age. Nearby, Miguel, the young busboy who had been observing the exchange, couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Miss Rachel, maybe I should get Thomas." Rachel spun around, her irritation spilling over. "Stay out of this," she snapped. "Go bus tables, that's your job." Clint watched the brief exchange, his gaze lingering on Miguel. Something about the young man's quiet courage caught his attention. As Rachel turned back to Clint, she straightened, her frustration evident. "Now, sir," she said again, her voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "One last time." The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Guests tried their best to focus on their meals, but the palpable contrast between Rachel's rising agitation and Clint's unshakable calm was impossible to ignore. "This isn't some highway diner," Rachel declared, her tone laced with disdain. "This is the Grand Oak. Perhaps back in your day things were different, but now we have standards." Clint set his glass of whiskey down, the movement deliberate and slow. Somehow, it carried more weight than Rachel's heated words. A few older patrons exchanged glances, instantly recognizing the telltale calm before some of Clint Eastwood's most iconic on-screen moments. "In my day," Clint repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a blade. One eyebrow arched slightly as he met Rachel's gaze. "Yes," Rachel said, doubling down, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your day, when people could just walk in anywhere, dressed however they wanted, order the cheapest drink, and take up space meant for real customers." She had fully committed now, her months of pent-up disdain for unfashionable diners pouring out unchecked. "Times have changed," she continued, her voice firm. "This is a luxurious establishment for people who appreciate modern luxury." Miguel, frozen mid-step, had stopped pretending to clear tables. Behind him, Thomas, the manager, hurried over, his face pale as he realized just how far things had gone. "Modern luxury," Clint mused softly, as if tasting the words for the first time. "And what exactly does that mean to you, Rachel?" The use of her name startled her for a moment. She wasn't wearing a name tag. She quickly recovered, assuming he'd overheard another server use it. Straightening her posture, she replied confidently, "It means knowing that not every place is for everyone. Our clientele," she gestured toward a group of young entrepreneurs snapping selfies with their gold-dusted desserts, "expects a certain ambience. They understand what the Grand Oak represents. They're not here pretending to be something they're not." The irony of her words hung thick in the air, unacknowledged by Rachel, but glaringly obvious to the veteran staff. Thomas was just steps away now, his pace quickening as he tried to intervene. "Pretending?" Clint repeated, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. Interesting choice of words. Rachel, now visibly irritated, let out a frustrated sigh. "Listen," she snapped, her patience worn thin. "I've tried to be polite, but you clearly don't belong here. This isn't some set from one of your old cowboy movies. This is a prestigious establishment. And I won't let you ruin the experience for our real guests." Her words echoed through the now silent restaurant. Thomas froze mid-step, his face drained of color. Miguel, standing nearby, dropped his bus tub with a loud crash, the sound reverberating through the room. At the next table, an older couple gasped audibly, their shock mirrored by other diners. And yet, Clint's expression remained unchanged. Calm and composed, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. "Jerry," he said into the receiver, his tone steady, "can you bring me the ownership papers?" "Yes, right now." "And the renovation plans we discussed last week." He placed the phone down on the table and turned his attention back to Rachel, whose confident facade had begun to crumble. A flicker of panic crossed her face as the implications of Clint's words began to sink in. "You see, Rachel," Clint began, his voice low but commanding, "I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months. Sitting at this same table. Ordering this same whiskey. Would you like to know why?" Rachel's face had turned pale, her composure faltering. She stammered, but no words came. "Because," Clint continued, his tone unwavering, "6 months ago, I bought this restaurant. Not for the prestige. Not for the modern luxury you seem so proud of. But because for 50 years, the Grand Oak stood for something real. It was a place where genuine hospitality meant treating everyone with respect, no matter who they were. Everyone with respect, regardless of what they wore or how many followers they had." Clint's voice resonated with a gravity that seemed to still the entire room. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could have heard the faint rustle of a napkin dropping. Moments later, Jerry, the restaurant's longtime accountant, appeared with a leather portfolio in hand. He nodded politely at Clint and, without a word, handed him the documents before stepping back. He tried to suppress a smile, but his eyes told a different story. Rachel stood frozen, her order pad hanging limply at her side. The weight of her mistakes pressed down on her in waves. Each new realization felt like another crushing blow. She hadn't just insulted a customer, she'd insulted Clint Eastwood. Not only had she insulted Clint Eastwood, but she had also offended her boss. And not just any boss, but a living legend. A man who had spent decades building a career playing characters who stood up against the exact kind of arrogance she had just displayed. Clint broke the stillness with a voice that carried the same gravelly authority that had earned him respect for over 6 decades. "Let me tell you a story about this place," he began, gesturing around the dining room. 50 years ago, I walked in here for the first time. I wasn't famous yet, just a guy wearing a shirt pretty much like this one. The owner back then, an old man named Thompson, treated me like I was the most important guest he'd ever had. Not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everyone." Clint paused, sipping his whiskey. "When his son wanted to sell the place 6 months ago, I bought it. But not for the prestige. Not for the luxury. I bought it to preserve that spirit. Real class isn't about designer labels or how many followers you have on social media. It's about dignity, respect, and treating everyone like they matter." Miguel, still standing nearby, straightened up a little taller. The older couple at the next table exchanged approving nods. Even some of the young influencers had put their phones down, caught up in the weight of the moment. Clint, never breaking eye contact with Rachel, continued, "The question isn't whether I belong here. The question is whether you understand what this place really stands for." Rachel's eyes began to well with tears as the full weight of the situation hit her. Her carefully constructed worldview was unraveling before her eyes. But what happened next took everyone by surprise, especially her. "I could fire you right now," Clint said, his voice softening, but still carrying that undeniable authority. "But that's not what this place is about. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice." He gestured to Miguel, who stepped forward nervously. "This young man tried to warn you. He recognized me, not from social media, but because he watched my films with his father. He understood something you didn't. Respect isn't about appearances." Turning to Miguel, Clint spoke with quiet authority. "Son, how would you like to start training as a waiter here? We could use more people who understand what real service means." Miguel's eyes widened with disbelief and gratitude. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." Clint turned back to Rachel. "As for you," he said, his tone steady and calm, "your choice is simple. You can walk out that door and find another job at a place that's more focused on modern luxury. Or you can stay and learn from Miguel and our veteran staff about what real hospitality means." Rachel wiped her eyes, looking around at the dignified faces of the longtime staff. She could feel the weight of the decision in her chest, but she had already made up her mind. "I'd like to stay and learn, sir, if you'll let me." Clint nodded, finishing his whiskey with a measured grace. Thomas, sensing the tension lifting, immediately put Miguel in charge of Rachel's retraining. The room, which had been frozen in tension just moments before, now felt lighter. The older couple at the next table began to applaud. Others joined in, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the powerful lesson they had just witnessed. It was a reminder that true class has nothing to do with clothes or status. It's all about how we treat each other. To this day, the Grand Oak remains one of LA's finest restaurants, not because of its luxury, but because of its heart. And if you stop by on a Friday evening, you might just see a man in a casual polo shirt sitting at his usual corner table, quietly ensuring that the old values of respect and dignity live on. Hey everyone, this was Ludwig. If you enjoyed this story about real class and timeless values, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments about a time when someone judged you wrong and how you handled it. See you in the next video.